26th, I should say, of July, the day marked in the calendar when Hunter Biden was going to be getting his day in court with his plea deal, which we'll talk about here in a second. But everyone, I'm tonight's sort of guest host substituting for Sunny, and I'm here with Don Anderson, the regular co-host for Wednesday night. How are you doing, Don?
Doing fantastic. Glad to see you. Glad to be here.
Just needed a little sip of water there. Yeah, good to see you too. It's been a little while since we've been on at the same time. From what but we always seem to find those moments, and today's no exception. There's a lot of news and a lot of interesting news at that. Why don't we just? Yesterday David and I talked pretty extensively about the Bronny LeBron situation, his son, and I haven't seen anything new since yesterday, but a lot of people have said that this raises serious questions, which deserve serious answers about whether or not this actually relates to the conditions that are brought on by the vaccine that have been identified by the CDC, like myocarditis, and that we've seen a rash of these types of things. Not that athletes didn't do this before, but it seems like, after 3 years, it's time to ask some questions.
No, absolutely. Especially when you consider the number of these things that have been occurring. And not just athletes, but people from pretty much all walks of life who are in perfectly good health and never had any event. And then suddenly they're having these things happen. So, so it'd be nice to not be called conspiracy theorists for simply bringing up the obvious. One should question that, and it should be looked into.
Yeah, I think that's how a functioning free country works. That's how we solve problems. We ask questions, and people don't tell you can't ask them. And then sometimes you get answers, sometimes you don't, but they don't tell you that you can't really demand them. In fact, this is where we're at, and it's time for that. By the way, a little piece of news here, breaking news. We want to say a big happy birthday to captive audience superfan Lori Shaw. Lori, happy birthday. You said happy hump day. We're saying happy birthday to you. Thank you for being one of our dedicated fans, and for helping spread the word and let people know what's happening here on the captive audience, because there's a lot that we cover every day, and we really appreciate it. We appreciate all of our super fans, including you, Bobby. Bobby usually opens up on the feed here by saying hi, family. So that just I agree with that sentiment. That's a really
I like it.
Yep. Well, coming back to what I mentioned at the very beginning here, so today was a big day for Hunter Biden, and literally for weeks we've been talking about how there was this plea deal reached with the Delaware prosecutor, U.S. attorney, who was assigned to the Hunter Biden case, and they spent all this time investigating. They had voluminous evidence that the FBI and the DOJ has had since 2019, like the laptop, which they said didn't exist, and of course it does, and it is what it is. But also some of this evidence they've been looking into since 2014. Some of it they've actually had in what's called 1023s, which are sort of corroborated or confirmed suspicious reports of potential criminal wrongdoing involving Joe Biden and Hunter Biden from 2017. And yet all this stuff was known going into the 2020 election. It was hidden. But a lot of people said, well, if there was wrongdoing, then this prosecutor won't be interfered with, and they will go and get to the bottom of it and file the appropriate charges. Well, unfortunately, what happened instead was the very serious multi-million-dollar tax evasion charges, which could have easily been brought at any time, never happened. And the statute of limitations ran out on those charges. And instead, what we got was a couple of a misdemeanor illegal gun possession, felony possession of a firearm while being addicted to illegal drugs, a crime that carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, but was offered what's called a pretrial diversion program, which means you do no time and you probably go to like some kind of therapy or something, and you stay out of trouble. So therefore, that's the deal that was offered, and he took that deal, but it was heavily criticized by everyone because that's not a deal that other people get, right? And none of this bribery, graft, corruption type of stuff, particularly the Foreign Agents Registration Act type of stuff, that nothing was ever brought on that, and it's like completely obvious from the evidence that's on the laptop and has been found through search warrants, and that the IRS agents have come forward that were involved in this case, at least two of them, and have turned whistleblower saying that there not only was interference, but there was a direct attempt to prevent any more serious charges from being filed and any questions being asked about the big guy, Dad, as one of the assistant prosecutors called us, is we're not going to ask any questions about Dad. And so today, because it requires the approval of the judge to accept this plea deal, Judge Mary Ellen Noreika did not accept the plea deal, and Hunter Biden pleaded not guilty at the hearing. So instead of pleading guilty to a plea deal, he pled not guilty. And the judge asked both sides to file briefs explaining the legal structuring of the plea deal. And so he was supposed to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax crimes. That was the other thing. And that was going to be the only thing that, he did wrong. His dad says he did nothing wrong. Joe Biden says that Hunter did nothing wrong. And this judge was appointed by President Trump, but has donated to people of both political parties, and really didn't. It wasn't possible to come and say this judge had some kind of a bias. The judge did ask prosecutors whether the deal would include possible Foreign Agents Registration Act charge, and the prosecutors said it would not. So that when you act as a foreign agent, they do things like they did with Paul Manafort and claim that he was doing this at some particular point in time, didn't register as such, and therefore they convicted him on that and gave him jail time, significant jail time. Hunter Biden, who did this times 10, and as we see increasingly from the evidence, Joe Biden would appear to have been aware of this, or had to have been aware of this, and possibly was present for different parts of the discussions with the people from whom the bribes were being solicited. And so this deal was rejected. And the Justice Department said Hunter Biden earned more than $1.5 million annually in 2017 and 18 and did not pay income tax either year, despite owing more than $100,000 in taxes both years. Each of those charges could have involved 12 months in prison, but those are maximums, and the federal crimes are typically less than the maximum. However, they offered probation, and these also, by the way, the judge threatened Hunter Biden's legal team with sanctions for making what she called misrepresentations this is the legal team, after they allegedly tried to trick the court into not including an amicus brief in the case from the Republican-led House Ways and Means Committee. And we know Republicans have actually been uncovering a lot of evidence that blew holes in the validity of both the investigation as well as the legitimacy of the charges that have been filed. But that's where we're at today. Hunter Biden is still up in the air, and he's pled not guilty. There's a mountain of evidence against him.
I tell you, okay, I'll play conspiracy theorist, but they slow rolled this whole thing and made sure the story didn't get out prior to the last election. And I maintain, at least my feeling is that when it's time to get rid of Biden, then they'll let this stuff go. And they'll have gotten rid of Biden. Doesn't look like Biden's going to go willingly, but they could sink his ship. That's what it smells like to me. I don't know.
Well, and it really does seem as if this whole situation is unraveling for Biden, because it's not just Hunter Biden, who's not the president of the United States, but it's all the things that Biden and the people under him have been saying about Joe Biden all along. They keep altering cleverly the language, like he's not in business with that he's never been in business with his son. Despite the fact that his son was paying expenses for an office that Joe Biden had and operated out of.
Sure.
That's not even disputed. But also that when they tell these stories and they claim that he had no evidence, no awareness, that he's done nothing wrong, you name it, no matter what the story is, they all seem to be falling apart as more information is revealed, both in terms of documents from the DOJ, as well as other evidence that's come forward that's concrete.
Plus, he's getting paid to advise in an industry he knows nothing about.
Yeah.
There's no way that happens unless, they're buying something. It's not his expertise, so what is it? I mean, clearly, it's his connections. So,
what they're saying here is that the Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee in the House, so James Comer and Jim Biden are the chairs of those, their findings appear to have substantiated links of the commander-in-chief's prior involvement in the first son's endeavors, his business, seemingly contradicting the claims of Joe Biden and his subordinates. So now this is what's emerging constantly. And of course, he angrily denies them. And the more anger he gets when he denies them, the more it really seems like this is probably very true. Because, I mean, it's cutting closer to the truth for him, and he is furious about it. But he's also got this entire machinery of the deep state that's been interfering, slow walking, as you put it, and covering things up for an enormous amount of time. We're 2.5 years into his presidency. And only now is some of this finally coming out. And a lot of this stuff dates back to not only before he was president, but before Trump was president. Going back to a time when there was a whole system of making sure that no one would actually pursue any of these investigations, and they would be quashed.
Yeah. So I think that's where we are. I think they're going to make a decision to eventually get rid of Biden. They'll let this stuff roll, and then whoever their replacement is, they'll roll in.
Looks like you froze there, Don. Hopefully that's not me, because I
leave on his own.
Oh, there you go.
You're back. He's really president.
Yeah, no, you just you froze there for a second. Yeah, maybe Joe Biden will resign on his own, but I think as long as this cover-up is being implemented the way it has been by people within the Department of Justice and the FBI, and perhaps some people within the IRS, not the whistleblowers, but others, we might actually need to have this impeachment inquiry just to get to the bottom of who has also been covering up and enabling all this stuff to happen. A fraud upon the United States, which is a pretty serious thing, over and above having a corrupt commander in chief, but also stealing an election by committing fraud against the American people by hiding all this and lying about it. I mean, bribery is a grounds for impeachment, and impeachment inquiries cannot be constrained If you subpoena information for an impeachment inquiry, they can't slow walk that stuff anymore.
Yeah, I don't see how you can not have an impeachment process here. I mean, ethically anyway, the ethical thing to do is to do it. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but I just don't say you'd not do it. They've been trying to impeach Trump for like nothing, for like what? The entire time he was president.
Yeah, no, and they don't like him. But this isn't about whether you like or don't like Joe Biden. This is about the truth. And that seems to be the hardest thing to get to. Trump actually released the entire transcript of his conversation with the president of Ukraine, which they said was the basis for the impeachment at the time. Well, there was nothing being hidden. And yet here it seems like there's a constant effort to cover these things up. The FBI apparently told the Delaware U.S. attorney that is the one conducting the investigation into Hunter Biden. They said that they had partly corroborated the bribery document, the FD 1023, which described a scheme in which the Burisma Ukraine Energy Company CEO Mykola Zlochevsky hired Hunter Biden to the company's board to secure his father's support to shutter a probe by then Ukrainian prosecutor general Viktor Shokin. And these are the same individuals that were mentioned in the impeachment when they were trying to go after President Trump for saying that this should be investigated. Here we are. What is that? 3.5 years later. And only now are we starting to talk about the validity of this, which they knew all along. Imagine if this document had been brought forward during the impeachment proceedings in early 2020.
Yeah. And the fact is, it would not be happening now, except for the Republicans have the majority in the House. It would not be happening now either.
No, that's right. We wouldn't even know that now. And so, but the IRS whistleblowers, so they were never told by the U.S. attorney about this FD-23 document. Because, by the way, you can't, not only are you supposed to be registered as a foreign agent, and if you're the vice president, you can't use your office for personal gain, which is the bribery, but you also can't earn all this income without paying taxes on it.
Yeah.
They did all of that stuff, apparently.
Right.
And the prosecutor did nothing about it in the end. So now we are seeing even more demands from people in the Senate, such as Chuck Grassley, who I think this is starting to become about the FBI and the DOJ as much as it is about Joe Biden. Because like you said, he could just end up being damaged goods, withdraw, not run again for president, maybe even resign. But then we have this corrupt justice system that made all this possible. That actually is the reason why we also have to get to the bottom of this. And every single person is going to have to tell the truth.
Well, there's where you get to we heard people talk about the administrative state. If you got unethical people running those departments, and clearly that seems to be the case, then they've all got to go. And that's
and then we need a new oversight system, because obviously it wasn't working, right?
Yeah.
You're supposed to have people overseeing the DOJ, and then you have to pass some laws to fix it. Because how many of these people that have been doing this monkey business have gone to jail for it? Some of them have gotten fired for lying.
Yeah.
But go ahead and try to lie to the same people that are getting fired when the investigation is going, and you're going to jail. None of them are going to jail.
Our entire system rests on the people willing to be ethical. If you think about it, the whole thing rests on the morality. A constitutional republic can't work without a moral. This is precisely why John Adams said what he said. If you have too many people who are unprincipled, it will come apart. And right now, we have too many people in those positions who are unprincipled. I don't think the country's unprincipled, but people who gravitate towards these governmental positions are power-thirsty, immoral, unprincipled people. I mean, clearly that's the case. You see it everywhere.
By the way, the IRS whistleblowers point out that some of the evidence that they gathered, absent this other stuff that we just talked about, came from Hunter Biden's own book. He wrote a book. What was the name of it? Beautiful Things. And he actually mentions in there that expenses were for personal choices and not corporate benefit for any business, that he did end up expensing and then trying to get deductions on. And you're not supposed to take personal expenses that are unrelated to any business activity and deduct them from your taxes. And yet he literally admits it in his book. I mean, if you can't find any way to bring charges and try to convict somebody who puts in their own book something that is illegal, you're not very good at your job.
Well, it's brazen. You would think at a minimum, someone who'd be careless enough to leave their laptop. Where'd that laptop wind up? In like a pawn shop or something?
It did, yeah. Well, there's no doubt that Hunter Biden's a complete idiot. That seems to be, and except his dad still thinks he's the smartest guy on the planet, which tells you a lot about Joe Biden.
It's just stunning, and cocaine in the White House. I mean, the list goes on.
Well, there's some other reasons to be concerned about the Biden administration, and some of this has to do with policy, right? So big news today, big economic news, is that the Federal Reserve, who pretty much controls not just the United States economy, but significantly influences much of the world economy, had to decided that they needed to raise the federal funds rate by 1/4 percentage point on Wednesday. They had held off in June from doing that. But then they decided to go ahead and continue their rate hikes. And now it's at the highest rate since 2001, which, the highest rate since January of 2001. And it might be heading higher. There's no reason to believe that from what they're seeing in the economy, that they are satisfied that they've reached the 2% target, which is what they say they need to reach. There's also a suspicion, apparently, that the Fed will raise rates 1/4 point again, but maybe in a couple of months. They're going to wait and see if prices fall, if labor, if the economy slows down, if labor costs ease. This is a big deal. This is what what did Bill Clinton's advisor once say back in 1992 when he was running for president? It's the economy, stupid.
Right.
Because there were a lot of other things that were going on that were being that seemed to work to the advantage of George H.W. Bush in the election, but the economy was not great. And Bill Clinton ran on the economy, and he managed to pull out that election. Well, we got a lot of major economic problems in the banking system, globally, slowdowns in different countries that are countries we expect might purchase our exports. And now we have continuing interest rate increases. And part of the reason for that is for something called Bidenflation. Which
you bring a great point, because I'm telling you, I do not believe that they're telling the truth about what the true inflation rate is. I've been on the planet long enough. I just went and just got some fruit at the store, and I think it was like $40 or something like that, right? And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way it's, what are they saying it is, 6% or something now? Is that what the latest on inflation is year over year? Yeah. And it's feeling more like, well, depending on the item, it's feeling more like 20%, 15%. I mean, I think they're yanking our chain on this inflation thing.
I mentioned it yesterday when I was talking with David. I said I went to Costco, and for the longest time, go back 5 years, New York strip steaks, like a 4-pack, were like $7.99 a pound. Then it kind of went up to $9.99 a pound, and it kind of stuck there for a little while. And then I noticed it went up earlier this year to $11.99 a pound. You know what it was the last time I went there just a week ago?
I hate that.
$14.95 a pound.
Yeah, We are not being told the truth on inflation. There's just no way. Um, and people can figure that out on their own. You go grocery shopping enough, and you can feel it.
Well, people can figure that out, but apparently that's not one of the things Joe Biden can figure out, or the geniuses that are telling him what is good for the economy. And so there was a really good, because he's gone around bragging about something called Bidenomics and talking about how well it works. And then they do polls, public opinion polls, and apparently uh, people don't believe Bidenomics is actually any good. In fact, Bidenomics is what's contributing to the continued increases in inflation, which is pretty concerning because the one thing you don't want one part of the government to do is create inflation, so the other part of the government has to put into place higher interest rates, which actually do make things different and difficult for everyone. It does. You really can't, like, if you can't afford to get a loan for a home, then less people are going to buy homes. And if you can't afford a car because the interest rate on the car is too high, you're not going to buy a car. And if the interest rate on your credit card's too high, there's going to be just things you're not going to buy.
And ultimately, an economy can't grow because you need to grow a business. You take out loans to do that. And if interest rates are too low, you can't expand the business. I mean, this is precisely what happened in the Carter administration when you had double-digit interest rates, double-digit inflation, which led to double-digit unemployment. It was the triple whammy. And I'm not here to say it feels like Carter just yet, but it's certainly headed in that direction.
Yeah, no, it is. He's already in Carter territory in terms of unpopularity. The only thing is, I think Carter probably more cognitively inclined to understand and be able to do the job he did in the late 1970s, however incompetently. But Joe Biden's got more than just incompetence.
Well,
he's got a problem. He doesn't seem to be able to do the job.
No, yeah, cognitively, I think we all know he's not there. And the one thing that Carter had, I mean, Carter was a guy of integrity. I think at the end of the day, he was not competent, but he was not trying to undermine the republic, if you will. I mean, he was an ethical guy. This guy we have now, I just don't think there's any ethics involved.
No, I think that it's a very good point. I think that what I'm concerned about is that we have somebody who doesn't know how to handle a crisis of his own creation. In fact, he's definitely committed to making it worse, which is forcing the Federal Reserve to continue doing what it's doing. They keep pumping money into the economy, spending huge amounts of money. And here was one very ironic thing that I found, which is that he told the House Republicans who run the House of Representatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is where budgets come from. There was this whole confrontation over the debt ceiling, if you recall, which is the limit on how much you can borrow. And an agreement was reached, and part of that agreement was sort of caps on how much federal spending would take place. However, Joe Biden's told Kevin McCarthy that his understanding of the deal is you got a debt ceiling, but he doesn't. He also doesn't. He wants to have a spending floor because he doesn't want to spend any less than what the deal discussed. Which, the House of Representatives is the one that's the origin of the budget bills. Mm-hmm. Taxes and spending bills have to come from the House of Representatives, and therefore, whoever's in charge and whatever that process is going to determine that outcome. But the president's going around and saying he's going to start vetoing a bunch of stuff. In other words, maybe he's the one who's going to shut down the government in order to save all this spending that he wants to have, which is creating inflation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's well, God save us.
Well, so $3 out of every 10 of the government spending is a deficit now. It's 1.4 trillion. It was 1.38 last year. It's grown to 1.4 trillion. And he's saying we got to keep spending more and more. This is not how you don't spend your way out of deficits.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't spend your way out of economic downturns and high interest rates by borrowing more money. That's one of the problems, is that you're actually borrowing and in an environment where the borrowing now costs more, which means that it gets more expensive for everybody, including the government.
Yeah, and spending on what? I mean, government by definition is wasteful. I mean, so we know that.
We know it's not going to be as productive as allowing the private economy to generate economic growth, which increasingly seems to be not a priority for Joe Biden. Well, another thing that's not a priority for Joe Biden is the southern border. And despite the fact that people don't really want to talk about that in some of the lamestream liberal media, it's a complete disaster. And the former DH secretary, Chad Wolf, from the President Trump, he was serving under President Trump through the end of his term, said that in a border security hearing on June 14th, Wolf said that cartels have control of the border and fentanyl continues to flow into the United States. Now, every Democrat now seems to be talking about how awful this is. But he said that, look, the border is effectively controlled by Mexican cartels. But Alejandro Mayorkas seems to be completely uninterested in supplying actual data about what's going on at the border, which is just crazy.
Well, the strategies forever has been vote buying, right? So you flood the country with illegals, get them in a position to vote, give them goodies, and then they vote Democrat. I mean, that's been the strategy forever.
Documented Democrats.
Yeah.
That's the term I've heard. Yeah. And I think there's some validity to it. But now, and they are talking about impeaching Alejandro Mayorkas because, and this was the latest thing, is that Mayorkas will not disclose deportation data. He won't tell them how many people that show up at the border he's actually sending back out. Which there's somewhere around 7+ million illegal immigrants that have crossed the border since Biden took office 28 months ago. 7+ million.
Yeah. And how much of that can we absorb?
Well, that's larger than I think than any U.S. city except for maybe Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, it's probably larger than Oregon as a state.
It is. It's more people than the state of Oregon by more than half.
Yeah.
But we can't seem to get this information from the same government that we're paying for because the guy that's in charge of it apparently doesn't feel accountable to Congress or the American people.
And what's worse is we have a media that won't report this stuff. I mean, in a normal functioning media, you'd never be able to get away with all of this stuff. I mean, a lot of these things have happened because the media is just another arm of the Democratic Party, at least the large scale media.
Very much. Now, what's interesting is here in Oregon, here's how the issue is. So every state, I think, has turned into a border state is what was predicted, and that's what's happened. But now in Oregon, the big concern that the Attorney General has is not that the country and the state are being flooded with illegal immigrants or fentanyl, even though they say they're concerned about it. They're like, they haven't closed the southern border to stop fentanyl from coming in, which is where it's coming from. But they are very interested in targeting people, local elected officials who might actually be cooperative with federal officials that are seeking information or assistance on finding people who need to be deported, particularly criminal illegal aliens. But Ellen Rosenblum, the Attorney General of Oregon, based on her understanding of the law, is targeting these elected officials for following federal law by saying that they are breaking state law. And so she's going after them. There's 51 reports of this that she claims have happened in the last year and a half. And she said Oregon Department of Justice's sanctuary promise system. So this is means that when people come in, no matter what they do, all these crimes they commit, it could be murder and rape and all that stuff. They're going to treat them just like U.S. citizens, even though they could be deported, so that we don't have to have them here at all. And she said that the system here in Oregon is to accommodate those folks and give them sanctuary in our state.
Yeah, and I I just don't know enough about law. I mean, one would think that federal law would supersede state on this kind of an issue, but I just don't know.
Well, they're going after local elected officials, and local elected officials who also don't want a bunch of illegal alien criminals running around committing crimes in their city. I kind of sympathize with them. Like, isn't that their job, is to protect us and do whatever by whatever means necessary? But I guess this is what she's doing. She's targeting these folks. People who are committing crimes are not her targets. Her target are people who are cooperating with federal law enforcement to get some of these folks to no longer be present in the state of Oregon and in their cities. It's troubling.
Because the state won't enforce the law. There is precedent for this stuff. This is the same thing the Democratic Party did during Reconstruction, basically. It's the exact same thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, and we're at a stage too now that I think we need to start looking very closely at how we can actually unwind these problems, even if there's a change of administration. We have to be on this. And I'm not super confident that we're going to get any bipartisan cooperation on rolling this back. The left and the Democrats seem to be totally committed to all of this stuff, no matter what. And here's an example of that on another topic. So in Congress, this happened today. A representative, I think she's from Arizona, if I recall correctly, representative, or maybe from California, Representative Kamek is her name. She was in a hearing that was dedicated to figuring out the funding situation for children in our hospitals. And one of the things that was a topic of discussion was gender surgeries. And Democrats said, well, we can't talk about this because you guys don't know anything about gender surgeries. You don't know anything, so we're not going to let this be a topic. And so she went and found a video from somebody who's actually from the Oregon Health Sciences University. He is a gender affirming surgeon who describes what these surgeries are. And she's like, well, let's solve this problem. Let's play the video of this happening, of this person doing this, and how they do it. What does it involve? What does it look like? And it was only a 5-minute video from a person who's an expert. And the Democrats went absolutely nuts. They said, you can't do this. They started objecting to putting it into the record. And normally anybody can submit anything they want to the record without objection. But the Democrats objected. And then what happened was the Democrats, they took a 5-minute recess. The Democrats went and watched the video. And then they came back and they confirmed their objection. And then what did they do? After the vote by the majority to include this in the record, they walked out of the committee hearing.
Well, you have to ask yourself, why are they so against? Yeah, why are they so against people hearing why are they so against people hearing the information?
Well, and they themselves said we didn't have the information. So she went out and got the information.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you can't do that. I think that the problem here is that these folks are dedicated to getting things funded and passed into law without the public fully realizing the full context of what's being done in their name. I mean, we're paying for these surgeries now in Oregon. We're paying for them, even for minors. And
well, as usual, yeah, they can't win based on a fair and reasonable argument. It's always through backdoor conniving, middle of the night lying. It's never the result of an honest debate and discussion, because what they're supporting is untenable and illogical.
yeah, that is, and especially once people find out what it involves, they're like, I don't really think we should be paying for that. That sounds like elective surgery for a person that should only be done with adults that can, sign contracts for themselves or make legal decisions for themselves, and not minors. But we're not only paying for that, but now they want to make this something that the federal government pays for. And when they try to shed some light on exactly what it is you're paying for, the Democrats don't believe you're qualified to even know that information.
Yeah, I mean, not even, in fact, that is like completely unethical for a doctor to even be doing it. It's really the sort of thing that, what a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. There's been no studies on that. You can't say there's been long-term studies, because just started doing this stuff in the last year, number one. And number two, what we know from the short term already is the tremendous damage it does to the people who do it. You're doing something that's irreversible. I mean, to a minor, that's like just crazy. And there's no data that shows what happens after you do it. And what little data we do have is they remain at high rates of suicidal ideation, more than they had when they started. And it's a money machine for them. You do that surgery, you got to keep coming back over and over and over again. And so there is, by definition, a moral hazard here. It's in the organizations, these physicians' interest to make more money by doing these surgeries, because they know you're going to come back for more of them.
Yeah, they say here that patients, this is the guy who does the surgeries, right? Who says that patients will face a lifetime of fertility, sexual pleasure, and lifelong post-operative complications. They will constantly have to go back for additional treatments. And because of the type of work that he's doing, which when you see it, and I will post a link to the original story that was on the Daily Mail. It
look at it with an empty stomach.
It really has a ghoulish quality to it, a kind of a Dr. Frankenstein quality to it. That is what people said in this article, that they felt that it really was not something that you should be subjecting anyone to, but certainly not children. And so that's where we're at. That's what's happening in our name in Congress. Now, there is some good news. I want to give you some good news from Congress. I think we owe it to the people who are fighting the. That's probably good news that stuff's getting exposed. At this point, I think it's helpful to make sure that at least we also point out something that they're doing, which I think sounds great. So you know how different states are trying to put into place reparations. I know we've talked about this before, and California is one that's really hot on that. They want to go and give millions of dollars out, and even billions of dollars, such as the recent law in California. And these are states, by the way, where people are leaving in droves. They're leaving these states. So I don't know who's going to end up being holding the bag for that one, but the people leaving are like, I'm not going to pay for this stuff. And the Congress, a Texas Republican representative, Brian Babin, is pushing forward legislation that will ban any future federal bailouts for states that pay race-based reparations, and they're paying out reparations for something that, of course, happened 160, 170 years ago. But then after they exhaust their funds on paying these reparations for something that's not a core function of government, and they run out of the money that they need for the core functions of government, come back hat in hand to the federal government and say, we need money. And this bill says, sorry, no money from us, because it's effectively you're just having us pay for your decision on reparations.
Well, so here's the thing with the whole reparations thing too. How are you going to decide who gets it?
Oh, I know.
I mean, It's just so, even if you believed such a thing was a thing to do, how in the world do you decide who's what percentage? This reminds me of South Africa back in the 70s when they actually, I don't know if you heard of this, but they would have a comb test where they'd literally run a comb through your hair in order to determine whether you were mulatto, black, or white. So we're gonna have people running around. I would be in trouble because
Yeah. Yeah, you got around the comb test somehow, right? You're a smart guy. I knew you were smart. You've outsmarted those guys. Even the leftists in California can't compete with you. By the way,
and who's the
one of the people that's
reparations
sponsoring this is Burgess Owens. Do you know him?
That name is familiar. I can't remember why.
So he is a black congressman from Utah who was on the 1980 Oakland Raiders Super Bowl championship team. And I met him, and I think you'd connect with him real well because he literally says these same things like, this is just garbage what they're doing. This is not helping people, and this is bankruptcy.
No, it's terrible. And I'll tell you the other thing it does too is what it does is for the people that you're purporting to help, what you're literally telling them is you can't make it. You can't make it on your own. We're turning people into like sissies is what we're doing. Instead of telling them about the tremendous opportunities that are afforded them in this country, like no other place on the planet, we're going to turn around and tell them that you can't make it, which is a lie. When you look at how much progress has been made on every front by every race in this country, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
But if you can sell that to the envious,
well, at least this will stop states that decided not to do this from having to pay for states that did. Because I think they should own their own consequences of their policies. If that's what they want to do, and voters voted for legislatures and governors to go ahead and pass this stuff, they shouldn't send the bill to another state that decided not to do it.
No, absolutely. 100%.
So I don't know if you heard yesterday, one of the stories we covered yesterday was that Tina Kotek seems to have now found a way to match the noteworthy honor that Kate Brown once entirely, being the nation's #1 most unpopular governor. And
she took the crown.
She is only 6 months into her term of office, so it's not good news for her. The Morning Consult poll is the one that does this. They do, I think it's a quarterly poll, and they check and see where things are at with every governor, approval and disapproval. Her approval rate is at 45%, which is at the bottom of all the governors. And the disapproval rate right now is about 36%. And our friends at the Oregon Catalyst came out with a report that lists the 15 reasons why Tina Kotek is the nation's #1 most unpopular governor. And it reads quite like a hit parade of things like she can't make a decision. She had 3 delay mishaps that ended up turning into disasters already during her term. She works alone, which is something Kate Brown was dinged for. She's not interested in bipartisan unity. She's been tied to scandal. She's one of the people that received money from the same entity that hired Shemia Fagan, the now former Secretary of State who resigned. Kotek, along with the Attorney General Rosenblum and Senator Ron Wyden, are all mired in that FTX scandal. She doled out 22% raises recently
I heard about that one.
Yeah, which including a $1,500 inflation bonus, which the only thing I can think of is that the inflation bonus, at least for these employees, might help cover the cost of inflation. But when you do it for such a large group in the state of Oregon, I think you cause inflation. So it's both. It's both. It causes it, and then it pays some people to suffer less with it.
Well, that tells you, and now you know about what inflation is, about 22%.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. Is that they don't seem to understand basic economics. Tina Kotek waits until 300 bills pass the House and the Senate to seek any public input on whether she should sign them. She could have been doing that all along. She puts the environment above people. There's a crazy quote from her that I won't go into right now, but people can go read the story I just posted. She avoids the public. She went to rural Oregon and visited one business. David and I talked about this yesterday, and there was the article yesterday that said Tina Kotek visited rural Oregon. Did anyone notice? Apparently, rural Oregon is one of the places that didn't notice. She's slow to act. She can't seem to make up her mind about the gas station self-service thing. But guess what? People are actually starting to ignore the law, because now that this has been passed by the legislature, they're like, I'm just going to go pump my own gas. I don't care what Tina says. She won't cut taxes no matter what. Her mansion has a natural gas backup generator in case she loses power, at the same time that she's signing bills and advocating for policies that say you can't have natural gas in your building, especially if it's new. And then she's got this gargantuan bill to fix housing, which isn't fixing housing, apparently. I wouldn't expect the government to be any better at the business of housing than they are at any other business. And they say they're going to fix homelessness by paying everyone's rent, about $87 million. And
that might be the worst thing.
It's hard because there's 15 good reasons here. And that might be the worst.
I mean, that's horrendous.
Yeah, and she's ticked off all the counties on the coast through her homelessness emergency order. So I encourage people to go read this, because Tina Kotek worked hard to become the nation's least popular governor. And I don't think the Democrats actually understand either why she's so unpopular, or maybe why they're completely off themselves, because two Democrat leaders, the Senate Majority Leader Kate Lieber and the House Majority Leader Julie Fahey, they wrote an opinion piece bragging about how they put aside politics to deliver for Oregonians. What's absurd about this is, if anybody knows what was going on in the legislature, it was all about politics. It was what they did is they put aside listening to the minority at all, and they put aside reasonable consensus things that everybody wants to see a legislature get done, like making a budget and so on, funding the education system. And they decided to put all that aside so that they could pursue two bills, which they didn't campaign on, that are way out of the mainstream, including the one that was for underage gender surgeries.
Their objectives are not the advancement of the people. I mean, their objective is the advancement of their agenda. And if that agenda causes hardship for people, tough noogies.
Yeah,
that's very clearly what they're about.
I've always had this philosophy that whatever the Democrats are criticizing Republicans of, that's actually what the Democrats are doing. And it's almost a distraction technique, or a pox on their both houses technique. But now I have a new one. The new one is whatever the Democrats say they are, it's the opposite, because they said it. When they say they're putting aside politics, what it means is they're doing exactly the opposite of that. They're all about politics and all about extreme policies and narratives. Now, it's funny because this article doesn't mention House Bill 2002, which they were prepared to go to the mat for until the very end and bring the entire legislature to a stop over that bill. They were willing to do that. And they almost completely didn't get any of their business done. But here we are. This is where we're at now, is that we've got people that are running. They think that they have an apolitical agenda, when it's like super duper political all along.
The only question is, well, it's a positive in that the governor's rating is so low. That tells you at least there's a percentage of the population is getting fed up. I mean, which should be good for the state come the next election. The question is, how much more pain does the state have to feel for people to respond?
I don't know, but I know the Democrats aren't getting the message. And here's something interesting that I think will show that maybe the tide is turning. So in Salem, the city council has passed a payroll tax, a tax on income, right? And they say it's to fund first responders to deal with homelessness and drug addiction. which you'd think they'd find somewhere in the general funds budget, given how high a priority these things are, like top priorities, right?
Mhm.
They can't seem to find any money there for it because they're spending it on something that's not those top priorities, apparently. So they are imposed an income tax, and it's not a small amount of money. It's going to be $27.9 million a year. If you make the average income in Salem of $62,000, it should be about a $500 additional amount of tax, which is not insignificant. And
No.
and of course, they don't really have an income tax like this yet. But now there is a group fighting back. Associated Oregon Industries, or sorry, Oregon Business and Industry, is leading the effort, and they are circulating a petition that it's called "Let Salem Vote." Let Salem Vote, and I'm going to put a link to this so that anybody who's a voter in Salem, in the city of Salem, can go sign it. You can also donate to this, because fighting this means fighting it so that it doesn't become a bright idea somewhere else. If you can reject it in one place, you can keep it from getting to other places by getting it trounced here. And
what is it supposed to fund again? Was it helping the homeless? Is that what it's supposed to
they
do?
say it's intended to fund efforts to house the homeless, combat drug addiction, and fund first responders, police, and fire, which were things I thought they should be doing with the general funds budget, since it's their top priorities.
Plus, this is the thing, like anybody else, if you had to spend something on something, you have a certain amount of budget you have to take from A, so you can like fund B. The government should be doing the same thing. You got to decide which pot is going to get reduced so you can fund this other thing. Now, of course, I don't think that any additional funds to the things we just mentioned are going to help anyway, because the homeless thing is not at the bottom. It's not a money thing.
Well, and it's not solved with more money, but they will use something that people perceive to be important in order to raise taxes, even though it should be their top priority for the taxes they already have. Really, I almost think that's why they don't want to solve homelessness and drug addiction, is that they need it as a tool to get people to be scammed into
more dependence. They like
more taxes.
Right. More dependence. The more dependence it creates, the more fentanyl's on the street, the more people are strung out on drugs, the more government you need. That's the Democrat philosophy, unfortunately.
Yeah, and a lot of these things. Well, and a lot of these things that they are doing, they lived high on the hog when there were a bunch of COVID funds flowing in, and they bloated their budgets, and now they're trying to figure out how to pay for it all. And this is how they're doing it. And there's a major backlash. Community groups are all pushing back on this. It's not just Republicans. It's all kinds of different folks across the political spectrum, businesses. And by the way, anybody who works in Salem but doesn't live there will have to pay this tax, which means that you can't vote on it, but you could donate to the effort to fight back. I would recommend doing it. I think I've already thought that this is something that across the state everyone should donate to, just to make just to nip it in the bud. So I put that up there. Go sign the petition, or go find out how you can support it, because their fight is actually our fight too. And then there's one last thing I wanted to mention. Today, a bit of breaking news. The Republican National Committee has a program called Bank Your Vote. President Trump has actually come out in favor of this. Now, at one point, a lot of people were saying, hold on to your vote, on election day. But now they're realizing that that's actually a pretty bad strategy, because the other side makes their job a lot easier of getting their voters out by getting all these certain voters to get their ballots in early, either by early voting or vote by mail, dropping it off. So now they started a program called Bank Your Vote. And President Trump has come out in favor of this and wants people to sign up and participate in this. And I just wanted to make everyone aware of it. Because
so how does that work? This is the first time I've really heard of it.
It's like a PR campaign where they'll help remind you about your expressed desire to get your vote in early, and where it is possible to do that. They'll make sure people know how. And that's it. In some places, there might actually be ballot harvesting where it's permitted. In Oregon, ballot harvesting is permitted. So we're going to fight fire with fire, and we're going to try to make our job easier on election day. of getting as many votes in earlier so that we can focus on what resources we have in getting the iffy or uncertain votes in at the last minute. Because look at how many elections we lost very close, less than 1% in some cases. And if just a handful of voters in every precinct had turned in their ballots early, we might have been able to get those additional votes we need out at the last minute rather than wasting time chasing people who were going to vote anyway.
Right. Okay, clever.
So this is, this is in hand with protecting your vote, which is the whole electoral integrity effort. And I think this is a good thing for us. So anyway, just wanted to drop that in. Those are two last stories that I think we can help do a public service, making people aware of. Any last thoughts on today's cavalcade of news?
I guess I would close with just saying, on a positive note, there are a tremendous amount of things that are going positively. The Supreme Court rulings have been fantastic. You look at how the public's responding to the Disneys and the Anheuser-Busch's and and the ice cream, the Ben & Jerry, and these companies are getting just killed, which means people are waking up and voting with their feet, which is in their pocketbook, which is awesome. That speaks a lot for what people really think. So I think it's positive.
That is good news. People are starting to wake up to wokeness. And, maybe if you go woke, you go broke and that, but also we got to fight back against all the other things they're doing and stand our ground. And everybody heard today what's happening in our country. Got to fight, got to stand firm and look for opportunities to make a difference. Thank you for being on here tonight with me, Don. It was a pleasure.
Well, great to see everybody. Have a great time at the soccer game.
Well, and please, everyone, share this show with everyone you can. Again, Lori, a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And we will see you guys on the next episode of the Capital Audience. It should be David and Sunny on Friday. Have a good